it was important to speak English and to adapt to Western and white ways. And so this is a photo of my dad's family's, their Chinese laundry that they had. And so I just want to mention that. And that leads to this painting. This was displayed at my 2018 Anchorage Museum show, and the title of the painting is Delicate Fingers. The inspiration was a story that my grandma told me when she immigrated to America as a refugee of war. She said that she held a statue of Guanyin, a glass statue of Guanyin, the entire trip because she was scared that the delicate glass fingers would break if she put them down. And so I painted this painting after she told me that story, because even though she tried so hard to keep that statue intact, I believe that our cultural heritage was quite disrupted in coming to America and being forced to assimilate. And so the painting is visually shattered to show the loss of culture within my family. And, I've come to really appreciate actually the fact that Buddhism and traditional Chinese culture was really sort of lost in our family, because I think that it's precisely because it was lost that it is so valuable to me now. That I think that had I grown up with Buddhism and Chinese culture, I might have taken it for granted or even rejected it. But because when I was born, it was noticeably absent, it's something that I long for and something that I really treasure now. So this is another painting that was in my museum show, and I'm showing it to explain that every artist creates artwork for a different reason. And the reason why I create artwork is for healing. It started out personal, but now I believe that my work has sort of a socially healing component or aim to it. And so I have sort of a complicated relationship with my art, because it's always been an opportunity to heal my trauma for me, and sort of to deal with the contents of my mind. And so it's not always the most pleasant, happy thing for me. So this painting directly talks about an experience of spiritual healing and spiritual trauma through imagery. And I grew up with a lot of suffering in my early life. I was not only an extreme minority where I was, but I was also gay. And so in my early life, I struggled quite a bit not being acceptable in society's eyes for those reasons. At the time when I was a teenager, I didn't even want to be me based on those two things. And I struggled quite a bit with suicidal ideation. I was hospitalized a few times. And I really credit artwork as saving my life, because it was an opportunity to do something with these really intense emotions and feelings. And so even if nobody saw the work, I would still make it because it serves this healing meditative function for me. My artworks are closer to meditation or a prayer than they are to a commercial object for sale or decoration. So about 3 years ago, my mother involved me with Khenpo Lodrothay Rinpoche, and I joined the Katagmati Ling Sangha in Oahu. And this is a painting I did of Rinpoche, and behind him is the Tibetan endless knot symbol that is communicates the uniting of compassion with wisdom on this path, that you can't have one without the other and still reach enlightenment, that those things need to be united. And I painted the endless knot as a melting ice block because I believe that compassion is an organic force of this universe, that we started out billions of years ago just as inanimate matter, and then we were these simple organisms, and then now as human beings we have virtues like compassion and generosity and empathy, and I believe that those are organic forces of the universe. And really, when I found Buddhism and these texts and this wisdom, to me it was like all the advice that I'd ever wanted from my grandparents and my parents. Just I find it immensely useful in my day-to-day life, that when I found Buddhism, it was the first time that I was told that you can actually do something about the thoughts in your mind. I grew up, and even with years with Western psychotherapy, I felt completely helpless to my thoughts, that if you have a self-destructive thought, you just have to indulge it. And Buddhism was incredible in just showing me so many ways that you can do something about your own thoughts, that that's actually our job, is to transform all of these obscurations into wisdom. Since I've become really involved in Buddhism in my personal life, my paintings lately have been ways for me to work my way around complex and difficult concepts within Buddhism. And so this was a painting that I made when I was first shown the concept of emptiness, the idea that everything in our world is not as solid and self-existent as we believe it to be, that everything in our world is actually quite impermanent and relative and interdependent. And so something that lofty of a concept can be, understood maybe rationally, but understood as a worldview is a whole different thing when you've grown up with a scientific materialist worldview. And so I use these paintings to work through kind of trying to rationalize my way through. And I really love Buddhism because I'm a very skeptical and rational person, and everything that I encounter in Buddhism is assessed critically, and in Tibetan Buddhism, you're supposed to. And so I love that because there's no faith involved, really. It's analytical contemplation that helps me kind of shift my worldviews to something healthier for myself. And down in the bottom right of this painting is a tan salmon skin pouch. A large part of my art practice is as an advocate for cultural exchange. There's a lot of sensitivities around cultural appropriation these days, and there's a lot of consideration about cultural appropriation, as there should be, but a negative side effect is that people are quite afraid to engage in non-Western cultures these days. And so I try to make a place for that in my work and my advocacy. So I learned how to tan salmon skin from an Athabascan artist, Joel Isaac, here in Alaska. And I asked him, would you be okay with me displaying work with the tan salmon skin? And he actually told me that before Alaska had salmon, Japan had salmon, New Zealand had salmon, China had salmon, and all those cultures had salmon skin and salmon tanning. And so in his mind, it was a global heritage. And so he said, as long as I was honest about where I got that skill from, that he was okay with it. And inside the little salmon skin pouch is a piece of yellow ochre pigment that an elder in Point Hope gave me. I've been lucky to travel all across the Arctic, and so there's a piece of pigment in here that an elder gave me that I actually used to paint this figure. And so that was emptiness within this triptych that I painted. So this triptych is emptiness, rebirth, and impermanence. And so these were three of the most difficult concepts for me growing up with a scientific background to attempt to relate to. And so the center panel is rebirth, and the image on the right is impermanence because it's the fireworks. And the closest I've gotten, because I really did not grow up with anything close to reincarnation or rebirth as a metaphysical truth. And the closest I've gotten to accepting it is the fact that each night we have a series of around 5 dreams, and our past experiences in the mind dictate the creation of those dreams, who we are, what the events are, and all of that. And I've come to think of my waking life almost like a long drawn out dream in that same way. And that's how I've been sort of able to think about rebirth in a very rational way. This was a recent mural that I did last year in downtown Anchorage. I was asked to come up with a mural to talk about climate change. And climate change is not something that I think about a lot. And so it took me a while to come up with a concept to raise awareness for climate change. And the first thing I thought of was my aunt, who's a Chinese brush painting master. And she told me that to the Taoists, man and everything that man does is an extension of nature. And so I wanted to communicate that because I think that's very true. And that worldview has given me a lot of acceptance about some of the darker sides of human progress. So that was the first thing I wanted to communicate. And so I used the image of Buddha smoking in this larger sort of sequence of murals that talks about global warming to talk about the fact that harm to the environment is directly related to harm to ourselves on one level. There's also a visual sort of connection between the cigarette and the shaved head sort of that cancer patients have. And the text at the bottom of my window says, in every mistake, a lesson. And that's, to me, a very sort of Tibetan Buddhist way of looking at the life and the world. In Tibetan Buddhism, we're supposed to bring everything that happens to us onto the path, that there's nothing that happens to you or that you struggle with that you can't learn from and be a better person from. And so it sort of alludes to that. But I also had a dream once, and there was a woman teaching me how to cook a dish in that dream. And as she was showing me each step, she was explaining that in life, everything, no matter how little, it's a lesson if you pay attention to it. And so I was honoring that dream in this mural as well. The other thing that's in this dream are dandelions, and there's text at the very bottom of my window that says, "The pilgrims brought the first dandelions, kill them, they hurt local nature, or eat them." I grew up in New Jersey with just millions of dandelions everywhere, and I always just thought about dandelions as weeds, as if they're in your garden, you don't want them in your garden. But I've been with my boyfriend now for about 6 years, and he's a botanist who works in ecology. So he talks to me about invasive plants all the time. And the dandelions that you see around are actually invasive plants. And so they compete for resources with the natural wildlife. And so they harm nature by being there. And I was shocked to learn that it was actually the pilgrims, like the Thanksgiving Day pilgrims, that brought the first dandelions to North America because they used them as food and medicine. And so a big part of living in Alaska is an awareness of colonialism and decolonization, and this movement where my family had to assimilate because it was an idea, there wasn't an honoring of difference as much as there is now. And so I like the dandelion as a symbol of colonialism and also of a changing climate and world. And so to all of you, I hope that you will pick dandelions if you see them around, because even just picking a couple of them, it stops the release of thousands of seeds. So wherever I am, I just kind of pick them as I see them. And the beautiful thing is it takes them a long time to get to where they are. So my dog's in this mural because it's through walking him every day and picking every dandelion that I see that I'm able to sort of change and help the land that I live near or live on. When I was really little in New Jersey, me and my sister used to go visit a family friend who had these little tree frogs in their yard, and we really wanted them to live at our house. And so one day we caught as many as we could. We caught about 100 of them. We released them at our house, and it wasn't the right environment, and so they didn't survive there. But we actually decimated the entire population at our friend's house. And so they never recovered and they never came back. And what that taught me was that one person really actually can affect nature. Nature seems like this impenetrable force that could withstand so much barrage, but in some ways it's incredibly fragile. And so I just want to mention that and encourage you all to pick dandelions. And so this is the second window in that mural window form, and it's underneath the Mendenhall Glacier in Juneau. If you ever get the chance to travel to Juneau, you should, because you can go underneath these glaciers, and they are insane. They're electric blue, and they're ridiculously beautiful. And so this was when I was thinking about karma, I painted this. And so the text at the bottom says, "In every action, consequence." And so the glacier is melting, the dandelions have gone to seed. And my painting students at UAA came up with their own windows, and so I helped arrange them and led them in the creation of this mural that sits downtown now. This was one of my most recent paintings. It's a mural I did for the La'ai Peace Center on Oahu. So I did it for one of our Sangha members in Katagmatiling. And so this is an image of the install up in the tea room. And to me, my paintings and my students' paintings, it's a reflection of our minds. It's sort of like our minds inside out. And since I've had Buddhism in my life, I've noticed just more clarity. And to me, this painting is a communication of sort of a healing mind, a clearing mind. So, all right. So then now I have some student work, just because we're leading up to your lesson. And here I just want to show you, so I've been teaching a beginning drawing class for about 7 years now at UAA. And it's always amazing to me the kind of transformation that my students have. So I wanted to first show you drawings that were the first drawing and the last drawing that my student did in my beginning drawing class. And so you can see here, it's actually the same scene, but with all the skills that I taught the student. So a lot of my students come in using lines to communicate form, which that's not actually how vision operates in the real world. In the real world, nothing's really outlined. It's shading and values and the edges of things that communicate form. And so then you can see the same scene with the emphasis more on value and less on line, how much the student improved. And my students come in at all different levels. So this student came in already with a little more technical skill than most, but once he was given the tools about how to really see, his work exploded. This class is really me teaching these people how to see. We grow up in we live in a linguistic culture. So when I say the word eye to you, you're not going to visualize an eye as much as you're going to think of all the nameable parts. So when I ask somebody to draw an eye, they're always going to draw me eyelashes and anything that you can name, because we live in such a linguistic culture. And we live in such a linguistic culture that you're actually really not seeing a lot of the things that you think you're seeing. And as soon as you try to sit down and draw what you're seeing, that's when you learn that there's a big disconnect. And this last student work sample I have is from one of my Inupiaq students. And I just wanted to show it to say that the world now, I've been around long enough to see it change. And I'm so happy to see that change, where my ancestors were really forced to assimilate to succeed here in this country. Myself and my students now can celebrate our differences, and we can celebrate our heritages in a way that really didn't feel accessible, even for me in the 90s. And so even in, the kind of negative feelings that I had about myself based on society and based on television and all of that, those things are beginning to change. And I'm so happy to see it reflected in my students. All right, so now that leads us to your lesson. So today for the lesson, I'm going to share my favorite lesson for the drawing class. And the lesson has to do with value, with light and dark. And light and dark is really not something that you think about in terms of vision if you're not an artist. But today in your drawing, I want you to really think about light and dark. I spent a whole semester with those drawing students, getting them to see things at the correct darkness. It's if you're out of practice, which we all are, it can be very difficult. It personally took me years before my drawings, my paintings met the darkness that they were supposed to. Most people tend to go too light. So what you're looking at here is a value scale. And what you're seeing is the lightest square on the left, the darkest square on the right. And so I want you to look at the black square. So I just added a darker square. And what happened is that what was previously the black square is now a gray square. And so look at the black square again. So I just added a darker square, which now is the black square, and the previous black square is now gray. And I saw this demonstration at a science museum years ago, and to me, it's a really incredible demonstration of the fact that a lot of our phenomenon in this world is relative. It doesn't exist on its own. There's really no such thing as black or white without a context. This black is only black because these other values are here. That white is only white because the other values exist. And so to me, it really challenged my idea that there is a self-existing thing called black and a self-existing thing called white. They are actually relative. And the interesting thing is I have to teach this concept of relativity within an artwork on so many different ways. So in painting class, everybody loves to paint with the colors right out of the tube at the full saturation with maximum brightness, and they never dull the paint. And that's actually a problem because something's only bright in a painting compared to how dull something else is in the painting. And so there's a relativity of color saturation that you have to consider in painting. There's a relativity even of content, that you can have things that are more exciting within a composition and things that are more boring, and they're only boring compared to the exciting thing. And so this is really important to understand as an artist, but every human being should understand that this is just a microcosm of how the world works. at large, that our concept of beauty, say, against ugliness, they do not exist except on a continuum. That your idea of beauty exists with this imaginary version of the ugliest person that you've ever seen as the measure, that, and there's no such thing objectively as beauty. And so there's something kind of liberating when in Buddhism we're trying to detach ourselves from this idea of things existing on their own independently. Other examples of things in our world that exist on a relative scale are happiness and unhappiness, or joy and sorrow. Your happiest moment is informed by the worst day you've ever had. That happiness only means something because it's weighed against your suffering. And there's many other things in our life too that exist in terms of relativity and not independently on their own. And so I hope that you can explore in your own life sort of what you may think about as really fixed and objectively existing that may not be as solid as you think it is. And I have a quote from the 37 Practices of the Bodhisattva. This one is by Thupten Chodron. And she says, "It's crucial to think about our situation in cyclic existence. One of the things that makes it so difficult for us to see our situation is that the appearance of this life is so strong. What appears to our senses seems so real, so urgent and concrete that we can't imagine anything else. Yet everything that appears to exist with its own true and inherent nature does not exist in the way it appears. Things appear unchanging, whereas they are in continual flux. What is dukkha in nature seems to be happiness, but it isn't. Things appear as independent entities, whereas they are dependent. Our mind is tricked and deceived by appearances, and this obscures us from seeing what samsara really is and from cultivating the wisdom that frees us from it." And so I just wanted to tie in your drawing lesson on relativity into a larger lesson in life about relativity. So now we can actually start with the drawing side of things. And so I have a couple skills that I wanted to share with you today that might be useful. You might hate it, but I don't think that there's anything that is cheating in art. And some people think there's cheating in art. I don't. So some people use projectors to make their images. Some people use a grid. And I just think there's different tools to get the job done. And one of my favorite techniques when, say, I'm doing a celebrity face or a specific species of animal where there's really no wiggle room for even a millimeter to be off, I'll use tracings. And so what you'll need today, and so I want to teach you guys how to work with tracings today if you want to. And those that really are averse to the idea of tracing, I can give you some tips on measuring instead. So what you'll need to do first, and nobody should do this yet, because I'll just go over what we're doing today. You should look for images on the internet where there's a darkness, where that value scale can be expressed, where you have light moments and dark moments. And so today I ask that you look for the head of a Buddhist deity, or maybe a Buddhist symbol, or a Tibetan character, something simple that you might be able to accomplish drawing within an hour or two, but you need to find something that has shadows. So what I advise you to do is actually search for maybe a sculpture. So I Googled Buddha head, and Buddha head yielded very good results for today's exercise. This one and this one. And these are all three are really good examples for today because they all involve the full value scale. You would not want an endless knot that's just a 2D cutout, because today's lesson is on how to match darknesses and to use darkness within a drawing. Is that clear? And so just something that you can draw within an hour or two. You guys might be able to get started with me today and then finish on your own. So I'll walk through what you're going to do just to demo. So we've got this endless knot that I've traced. And so what you can do, this is what I call the poor man's projector. You can actually, with printer paper, turn up the brightness on your device and it becomes a light box. And so the first thing that you guys are going to do after you select your image is actually use your pencil to trace your image on top of your phone or iPad or laptop screen to get the line work, the proper line work, because today's emphasis is shading and value, so I don't care about proportions. If you want to just freehand it, you can. And the best tip I can give you for freehanding is to measure, so you can objectively tell the proportions of your object. Oops. by visually measuring it, by pinching your fingers, keeping that measurement constant and saying, is it as wide as it is tall? And it's like, oh, it's a little wider than it is tall. And then you check to make sure that that's it in your drawing. That's the best tip if you're going to freehand. But those that are want to trace, all you have to do is put a piece of printer paper in front of your screen, turn off the lights in your room, and turn up the screen brightness, and you will trace. And so I'll just demo that real quick. So, and I have my little tester one. Let me see if I can finagle this. It might not work. And so anything, the pressings. So anything that's important to communicate, you can trace. So I actually will trace shadows as well as the general outline, because the shadows, tracing the shadows is useful to know where the shadows end and begin as well. And you just want to keep the paper from moving, and you can just use light pressure. One thing that my drawing students learned right away with pencils is you need to control the pressure. And when you start a drawing with pencil, you want to use very light pressure so you can erase those lines later. So this is just me tracing, and this was sort of like after the tracing was done, and then I'm beginning to shade it. So today, once you guys get your tracing on, then I want you to practice shading to meet the darkness of your image. And so if I would keep working on this, I would keep pushing the darkness. And there's just a couple things about the pencil that I want to talk about. The first is that it's going to go lighter or darker depending on your pressure. And so you might want to practice on the side of the page, light pressure to make a really light line, and then heavier pressure to really make a hard line. The other thing too is to shade, you may want to use the side of your pencil because it lays down material faster. And so depending on how large your drawing is, you can use the side of your pencil to lay down shading. And you can see that it creates a bit of texture. And so you can actually use your finger to wipe away texture and get more convincing forms. So those are just a couple of things about using the pencil, because I want you guys to focus on shading. And then one last thing that I wanted to share with you, and you probably don't have time for it today, but once you have a tracing or just a printout of your image, so this is a tracing of this Buddha head, you can actually put graphite on the back of your paper or your printout. And then if I were to put this on a heavy duty piece of drawing paper, I could actually transfer the lines again to a more solid, thicker piece of paper by just pressing with a firm pressure with a pencil or pen, all the lines. And what it'll do is it will push all the material I put on the back onto my new piece of paper. So that's just a technique for if your paper is too thick to use to trace, or if you want to transfer that line work. So that's what I actually do for my paintings. Sometimes I will trace, say, the bird form, and then put some graphite or charcoal in the back, put it right on the canvas, and press my pencil to it, and it'll actually push all the lines onto it. So that's just a tip that you can use on your own. So are there any questions? So for today, I'll just go over it really briefly. You are going to first find an image from Buddhism, either a Tibetan character, a symbol, or a deity head, like a Buddha head or a deity. I say head because if you try to do the whole form, there's probably not going to be enough time. And then my second consideration is that you need to pick an image where the value, the light and dark of the image is important. And so that's why I'm advising that you guys look at potentially sculptures or carvings or sort of jewelry of symbols as opposed to flatness. So your first task will be to trace on a sheet of printer paper your deity head or symbol. And then I want you to use the pencil to try to shade it to match the darkness. It's one of the most valuable lessons that my drawing students have to do, is just meeting that darkness and starting to look at the world, not linguistically, but actually for what it looks like. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
After I trace it, how I missed the step? How do I put it on my canvas on the paper?
Oh, yeah. So for today, you can actually just keep drawing on the tracing. So for today,
Ah.
you can actually just trace onto the page and then just shade, and that could be the finished drawing. But if you ever wanted to do something else with the shading, what you have to do is first you trace it. So I had the foot of the Buddha and I traced, and then you have to run graphite, the pencil material, to cover the whole back of the image. And then you'll place your image like this against the canvas, and when you press with a pencil or pen along the lines, it actually pushes the graphite off of the paper and onto the other surface. So then you'll actually have the line work on the canvas.
Okay.
And then just for anybody that is interested in that technique, if there's something dark you're transferring onto, I have to use white drawing material. So I use white pastel so it shows up on something dark. So that's the only thing to keep in mind for that. Right, so
excuse me,
Yes.
I have a question. So I just can I use just 70 grams of A4 paper?
Yes,
enough?
yeah. So printer paper is ideal for today. And then any pencil's fine, but our art pencils come in a grade that's labeled either B or H, and that designates how dark it goes actually. So I've asked if you guys could to have a 2B pencil, because if the graphite pencils that have B written on them go darker because they're softer. And as the number goes higher, the pencil gets darker. So a 6B is darker than a 2B. But that's why I advise the 2B pencil today, because it will match the darkness of any image you can find online.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. I forgot. It's been a while since I did this sort of thing. How do you transfer a tracing to a painting that has an underpainting?
So if it's dark, what you would need is a material that's just white pastel. And so if it's white pastel that you run along the back side of your tracing, so in this one, I have graphite on the back that would transfer. But for the painting, I would actually do white drawing material, because then when you press it, you're going to get white lines for the line work that you can see in contrast to the darker background.
Oh, right. Okay. I think you said that. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so I'll be here to answer any questions, and then I believe at some point we'll have the opportunity to share. So something manageable within the time. And I think we will be ending at 2:10, or not 2:10. Yeah, 2:10. So you will have about half an hour. And you'll get even more realism to your drawing if the initial line work that you transfer, you actually emphasize the shading and then gently erase out those preliminary lines. Because as I mentioned before, nothing in our world is actually outlined. And so to give a convincing form, it's just got to have a nice hard edge. Yeah, and Google Images will work for images.
Excuse me. Do you ever use fine charcoal for this process, or prefer it at different times?
Yeah, so the graphite gives you more cleanliness with this process, but I do it with charcoal all the time. And the only difference with charcoal is the charcoal that you put on the back of your transfer, if you're going to transfer it, you need to wipe it with a paper towel or else it's way too messy. So the white pastel needs to be wiped as well. Graphite stays put, so you don't have to. But if you don't wipe it, then your transfer lines will be there as well as a pile of powder. Yeah. So I'm also here to answer questions about my work, I guess, too, if anybody wants to ask me anything as well.
Oh, I had a question about your work. Do you work mostly from live models, or because you do so much figurative stuff? What's your process with that?
So I work mainly from photographs. I actually started only painting from life, but it was so limiting. Like I could only paint people that were standing or sitting, it seemed. And so I moved to working from photo references. But the things that you have to understand about working from photographs is that the camera makes a lot of decisions that your eye would have to. So it tends to flatten images. You lose information in the darkest and lightest parts of your subject. And so sometimes I'll actually finish from life if I have the luxury. So I'll work mainly from a photo and then I'll finish from life so it has the lifelike quality to it. But yeah, I work mainly from photos for convenience sake.
Thank you.
Let's see. So somebody added in the comments when they put the paper on, it'll move it because it's a touch screen. So that was happening to mine. Sometimes it doesn't. So if you have something that's not a touch screen like a laptop or that's preferable. I've managed to not have the iPad wiggle around like you guys were seeing. It stops fighting with you at a certain point is the only thing I can say. There might be a setting, but I'm not sure. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is that besides the transfer, I guess even including the transfer, whenever I'm drawing or painting, my pencil's never touching the paper unless I've noticed something from my subject that I am recording on to my drawing, or I've noticed something that's off that needs to be changed. It's really common for me to walk over to my students and they're just staring at their drawing and I haven't seen them look up at their subject in a very long time. Don't fall into that trap. Literally every single time your pencil touches, it should be because you've noticed something that it needs to change in the drawing. You're making that change. This is an exercise in single pointed concentration. A good drawing is just the accumulation of hundreds and hundreds of small observations. Have I gone dark enough? Is that edge convincing? Does that line, can I get that line to go away because that's not there? Can I add that detail or finesse this? So it's just something to keep in mind and aim for. And those of you that want to get more practice with life drawing and getting better with your technical skills in that way, I advise you to draw a white egg that's lit half in shadow that you just set somewhere white. because basically it forces you to only have to look at the values and you don't have any sort of detail to get distracted by. So a lot of my students have breakthroughs when I sit them down in front of just a plain white egg with lots of shadows on it and force them to draw that. When I'm trying to get something darker in my drawing, I'm literally pressing as hard as I possibly can with the pencil sometimes. And so that's where the more heavier duty art paper can be useful, because newsprint or printer paper eventually is going to fall apart if you're putting that much pressure to it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Do you use the side of the pencil or the tip?
To shade?
Yeah.
To shade, I use the side unless it's a really tight space, then you can just use the tip. But to do your line work, you could just put it straight down. Yeah, I just shared using the pencil on its side to shade because it's quicker. But if you have a really tight area that you're shading, doesn't make sense. Like the thing I'm shading now, it's so fine that it doesn't make sense to.
Okay.
And I've got one other trick for you guys. So there's these things called blending stuffs in drawing, and they're essentially these little paper rolls. And so you can use them to carefully scooch the material and blend the texture out. And so, oops, sorry. It allows you to sort of blend the texture out that the graphite creates, and it allows you to get into fine details. And if you don't have a blending stump, you can actually just rip off a little piece of your printer paper and wrap it around the tip of a pencil or a pen. And if it's completely covering the tip of your pencil, you can actually use it as a blending stump to do the same thing. So it's just a homemade blending stump that you can wrap a pencil in a little bit of paper. And so I use my finger to blend the material, and you have to blend because there's always a texture that's created by the drawing tool. And so sometimes your finger is too large to blend, and that's when I use a blending stump, or when I will blend with a homemade blending stump, which is just paper wrapped around a pencil. I'm kind of the king at jury rigging things. Yeah, so and the other thing too is just because you're transferring lines, don't be complacent that those lines are correct, because as you draw and add more material, things will shift around. So you always want a very critical, very aware mind, just constantly analyzing your drawing and what needs to change. The good news is it's always just one small decision after another. The decisions you have to make in a drawing are never bigger than like, is this dark enough? Or, is that edge sharp? You may have to go over dark areas several times, working the material in, blending a little bit, adding more material. And then don't forget about the eraser too, because the light values are just as important as the dark values, because the dark values need those light values to exist to give them context. And so don't neglect your light values either. If your image allows it, sometimes just completely darkening your background behind your form will make all of the lines around it disappear visually into that darkness. And also things that are dark tend to push back in space. And so if you darken the background behind your form, it will sort of sink back behind your form. With drawing, sometimes you have to be really careful. There are things you can do to the page that you're not going to be able to remove the trace from. But why I love painting so much is that it's incredibly forgiving. That I could paint my entire painting black, then decide to paint it white, then decide to paint it black again, and no one would ever know.
Do you use mostly oils or acrylics?
I actually use both. So what you're looking at behind me is mainly acrylic, and then only the figure on the left has been started with oil. So basically acrylic dries so quickly, it dries within 5 minutes. And so I use it to do the first layers. And then I finish when oil usually, because the kind of detail you can cultivate, it takes 24 hours basically to oil paint to dry. So I can cultivate a lot more detail and blending with the oils. So that's what I do. I forgot to mention the piece I'm sitting in front of. This one is my depiction of greed, hatred, and delusion as the three poisons. And I don't plan any of my artworks. My middle name is Pu, and it translates in Chinese as divination. And we think that our ancestors were oracles. And I kind of feel like my paintings do something similar because I don't plan them. To me, it's a dialogue with the work itself. And so anyway, it's greed, hatred, and delusion. And for hatred, I was originally going to do something in reference to my suicidal ideation, my suicidal tendencies. But the violent imagery that I came up with seemed not right for it. And so what I came up with is this a more primal depiction of hatred as just sort of my dog barking at a cat, trying to get a bird, trying to get a moth. That hatred is kind of much more elemental than it is sort of in my head. And then for delusion, it's an image of Buddha looking at a reflection, because in Tibetan Buddhism, we talk about Buddha nature a lot, that we're inherently good, and it's actually us getting rid of the obscurations is our task. And so the idea for delusion is that Buddha doesn't know he's Buddha and is looking at a reflection. And then all the figures are in a lotus pond. There's just a tiny lotus that I just started painting over on the right, because it's actually the transformation of our greed, hatred, and delusion into enlightenment. This is actually, the negative emotions are actually the mud. They're the fuel for our journey. So in the spring, I've been asked to do another mural at the university. And what I'm planning to do, it's in a stairwell. And right now the title is "Where Were You at the Big Bang?" And the mural is going to depict key moments from the creation of the universe. And then it'll show the different animal forms that humans were before we were people.
That sounds fantastic. Do you have a
Thanks.
page we could follow to follow your work?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I haven't updated my actual website since 2018, but Tom Chung Art is my Instagram page if you guys want to see what I'm currently doing. And there's a link to that on my unupdated website, which is tomchung.org.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. And I think anybody can be an incredible artist. It really just takes the time to dedicate to building these skills. And I don't think that everybody has the patience and the passion that it takes to sort of get there. But I don't think that it's beyond anyone's grasp. we live in an interesting time for art these days because if we were making art during the Renaissance times, there's a very rigid definition of art, and in the West at least, and the kind of subjects that you'd be allowed to engage with. But now any type of art making is considered valid, and that upsets some people. There was a big controversy with like a banana duct taped to a wall, and people are horrified that it's art. But what I always tell my students is, I'm excited that in this day, in this age, everything's art. It doesn't mean that it's good art. But in art history, all genres, all pursuits within art are considered valid avenues towards truth. Those of you that enjoy drawing, besides the blending stumps, you can also get mechanical pencil in a 2B grade of lead. And so a mechanical pencil that will go much darker can be really useful for those of you that enjoy drawing with detail. So something I realized lately is that the work I'm engaging in now are distinctly American Buddhist paintings. And I was really excited about that because every time Buddhism moves to another country, it absorbs the culture of the new country. And so it's interesting to see not only Buddhism shift as it is embraced by the West more, but we're also going to see Buddhist art that is distinctly American or Western for the first time, really. So there's a quote about art that I really like, and oddly enough, it comes from the rapper Jay-Z. And his quote is that the aim of art is to elevate, refine, and transform everyday life. Because in my practice, I'm always comparing waking life to a dream. I like to think about what it would mean in a dream to be sitting here drawing a Buddhist symbol or a deity. That to me, that seems like if it were taking place in a dream, it would be a quite significant moment to the mind stream. Remember that texture will affect values. So when you need to blend, and if it gets a little messy after you blend, just carefully erase up. The back of a pencil eraser is good, but you can also cut square erasers to give yourself fresh points to erase with more detail and control. Something that will help with the believability of your drawings is if you begin to limit what is the white of the page to only denote the lightest parts of your subject, that goes a really long way to the believability of an image. So in about 5 minutes, we'll be hearing reflections from you participants. And so I think just holding up the drawing to the Zoom screen will work for this. So in about 5 minutes, anybody that would like to share or ask more questions and talk about what their experience was like, we'll have time to. So unless the correct darkness of a shadow is matched, it's not going to be believable as a shadow or even read as a shadow potentially, and it won't sink back in space. So even just with a couple minutes left, it's a good idea to just assess, especially with your darkest areas, just check against the reference image and ask yourself, have you gone dark enough? With graphite, it's a layering of material. A lot of people are shocked at how much paint or how much drawing material needs to accumulate on your surface before you can have realism, but it's a lot. So as we're finishing up, I'll just show you guys, in the time I just shaded a little bit more on my endless knot. So you can see I shaded the background, which allowed for the lighter values on the highlights of the knot to protrude and to pronounce themselves. And so that's just a quick, easy thing you can do to help with your value scale.
Okay,
Lovely. Good. Yeah. I think a little more material on the page would help give believability to it. Oh,
that's what
Tina,
it's
that's
supposed to
great.
be.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, sometimes you have to get like a solid application of material for the form to be believable. So sometimes it requires a little bit more. Tina, I see yours. That's great. You really matched the darkness as well. And
Wow.
yeah, that's good. Excellent. Good job. Oh, Christine, that's great. Good start. Good. Yeah, putting darkness behind always helps really get the form to protrude. It's what's great with the transfer is you have a lot of good. You can sort of rely on that structure to it. So I'm not sure how you're gonna organize this share. Pretty, do you know?
I think people just show it close to the camera. Okay, let me going to try here. Can you see it now? Can you see mine?
I don't think you have your
Oh,
camera.
oh yeah, I know, I forgot. Okay, there you go. Can you see it right now?
No.
No? Oh,
No.
because the camera did not. Okay, I have to one more time.
Melanie, that's great.
Mine.
Well, you had it there for a
I
second.
have
Shirley,
Kuan
looks
Yin,
good.
but I don't have any, I have no eraser.
Oh no, you have no eraser.
Oh,
So that's why I couldn't get it, but there it is.
Sure. And then Shirley, for yours, that it's because it's so dark, you're going to want to put a bright spotlight on it. So if you ever want to draw that as a subject, get bold, bright highlights on it. And the closer your light source is, the darker the shadows will be. So it could be right
Yeah.
there next to it.
Yeah,
Great.
it has, yeah, anyway.
Good. Yeah, it's great. Okay, now we can see it, Franny. Let's see it.
okay, all right. I have a lotus. Can you see it now?
Yeah, it's a little too close. Here, back just a bit.
Good.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, good job. Yeah,
Oh,
things with
thank
patterns
you.
like the lotus leaves sometimes actually get darker on the petal tips. And so I will spend hours looking at a lotus photos to pick one because I'm looking for ones where there's actual clear shadows on it. It can be so tricky. I always tell my
Yeah.
students to downplay pattern, but that's
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, it's
Good
here is
job.
my model.
Oh,
Very cool. And it's great because the darkness would let you really go dark for the background, which will make the form pop. Good. Does anybody else want to share it? Liz, good, lovely. Yeah, anytime I have something symmetrical, I'm not going to do it by hand because it doesn't make sense because it will just create such a time suck. And so that pattern you have, Liz, is a really good one for this. Like there's some subjects that are better with this sort of exercise. Penny, what did you draw?
Sorry, I was trying to use my screen, my virtual screen.
Oh,
So I drew a Jisoo, but it's kind of
oh wow.
oh,
Ooh,
there it is.
yeah, it looks
Yeah, that's
nice.
excellent.
I can't,
Yeah.
I can't get it to come out fully. So anyway,
Well, Zoom thinks it's real. It's believable enough that Zoom you put it in front of your background. It's very cool.
exactly. So
Good. Yeah, good shading. It's quite believable. Cool.
Okay, Nantia.
Lovely.
Oh,
Good.
Nantia, okay. All right, very good,
Oh,
Nantia.
very good.
Right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, for both of you who just showed, you want to put a little more material on the page, then blend it, and then add more material. That's when you're going to start getting the form to believable. Like my figures don't start seeming real until there's so much buildup that like it's actually got a physical sort of substance to it. And it's the same with drawing, believe it or not, even though it's a lot thinner material. But those are great.
I drew
Anyone
a
else?
monk
Yeah,
staff.
Michael.
I don't know.
Oh, lovely.
But background, like you say, would help.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I love the cheap trick of darkening a background and then the form just shoots forward. Lovely. Very
Barbara. Barbara, I couldn't see yours.
Hold it up a little higher.
Oh, good. Lovely. Yeah, I'm glad a lot of you
Now I
guys
see
chose Buddha faces. They're a wonderful subject. Jing, can I see? Can you lift it up a little higher? Good, 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 good. Yes, so this was a very brief time for you guys to be doing even just a small drawing like this. And so it is so time consuming that to really get something refined and believable, it usually takes many hours. So just keep that in mind. And, you know, something like this can be part of your practice in the same way at Zen temples, they have pottery and archery and things like that. Fine art skills, I believe, are an opportunity to practice single point and concentration and an opportunity to get a sense of what it feels like to be in a flow state and it's sort of not conceptualizing, like hours will pass. I think I painted on the 7 hours yesterday and I was just like, where did my day go? But it's a good thing. And it's just, anyway, let's see. Does anyone else want to show?
I want to ask Phong Pen to show her. Phong Pen.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, Phong
Did
Pen,
you say
show-
something?
Yeah, I want you to show your drawing, Phong Pen.
I don't know. Well, I'll try.
All right, just show it. Okay, show it onto the camera.
How do I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, put it. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah,
beautiful.
wonderful.
Wow.
Ooh.
So nice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to see Jico's.
Yeah.
I
Oh, lovely.
can't see it.
I can't either.
Little faint. Just up a little bit. Good. Good,
Oh
good,
yeah,
good.
very nice.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Wow.
Chico. Sensei. Too good.
And Natia, yours is a little blurry. I think maybe it might be your Zoom, your filter. Can you hold it up again?
Nantia.
is that you? Yes.
Yeah, Nantia.
Oh,
Excuse
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Okay, show it one
Oh,
more
it's
time. Yeah.
Because my office is so dirty. Okay.
Dirty.
Put
I
it up.
will not blur my
Okay.
okay none. And then you can see my office is so
Okay. Yeah.
dirty.
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Good.
Wow.
Good, good,
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah, I hope that you all understood from today's exercise that our visual phenomenon is way more about shading and darkness than it is about line. That just all of the drawings that you've all put up and shown me have shown that you guys emphasize the values. And believe it or not, that's going to make the biggest difference. And it's and I always wonder if artists, after you learn this way of engaging with the world, if you are actually seeing things more accurately, then you will notice how dark something is, as opposed to just let the brain do a shorthand of just labeling everything for you so you can move on. Anybody else?
I have questions, please.
Uh-huh.
So after drawing and then try to what do you call this? Like to do this.
Oh, the shading, the transfer. Yeah, so
Uh-huh.
yeah, if you wanted to, so you wouldn't do it to these now that you've shaded them. So the process of transferring an image, which I call the charcoal transfer, but you can do it with graphite, that's if you want it on a heavy dutier piece of paper or on a canvas for like a more serious artwork. So all you need to do that is run enough graphite along the back, or you could also do it with charcoal and just sort of wipe it after. Then you're going to press the line work wherever you want the lines to transfer. And you're going to put your pen or pencil and press along all the lines, and the actual pressing is going to push the graphite that's on the back to create lines where you're pressing onto the canvas or the paper. But the thing to consider is my canvas is so dark that I would need to put white drawing material on the back. So that's why I'm recommending, if you're transferring onto something dark, do it with white pastel. Yeah, on the back.
Well, Thomas, your work is just so wonderful. Just thank you for doing this and sharing this. It's so nice to see other artists' work and to actually talk to them instead of just seeing the little pictures of their work. So thank you very much.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
We have time for another. I just had a question. I don't know if this actually shows up. I got
Oh, wow. Yes, it does.
really involved with the lips.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. And I realized that, trying to get close up here, where the edges of the statuary had like little details within the, I can't point to it and hold it at the same time, but the upper lip, it had like these little crevices
Yes,
where,
the
you know, the lips.
chips. You've captured it, the crack. It's incredible.
Yeah, it and I didn't have an eraser, and this was
Oh no.
a colored pencil, so it was oil, like a waxy
Oh,
base.
sure.
So I just got really involved with that, and I thought, wow, I really could have used an eraser. But I think this really reminded me, I guess, that even within things that look like lines, like the edges of the lips, that there's still shapes, even though there's like really, really teeny tiny, looks like crevices around the edges of the lips that I was like kind of caught up with. Wait, where does that line turn? What is the shape of that thin strip around the edge of the lip? And then, so, you know, I found my mind kind of going to this place where I go with meditation, where I'm like, I start getting analytical about my thoughts, or I start getting frustrated with the sitting, or I just start thinking, oh my gosh, I just need to think about something else. What's going on with the nose? Forget the lips, you know? And I just thought, wow, this feels like a bad sitting where I get frustrated with the detail and I can't sit with the discomfort of not knowing exactly what I'm trying to get at.
It's funny though, because your rendering is so, I think, so successful that it's surprising to hear that you sort of mentally struggled with it. You did such a good job of letting the white of the page create those lighter values. It's just very controlled with that application. And those little cracks that you rendered, which are like an excellent moment in the drawing, by the way, that reminds me that as I get older, I become much more critical about what I will sit down and paint, because at the end of the day, you will have to paint or draw whatever you sit down to do. And I know that sounds really obvious, but enough times painting like a chain link fence or 100 trees out a window, and it's like I become very discerning about what comes into my work to actually work with. So it's like, you notice those little cracks, and those actually translated so well into the drawing, but sometimes things will not translate well. So when I'm photographing figures, I'll take thousands of photographs, because if a hand is looking wonky in the photo, it will look even more confusing in the painting. And so sometimes textures, sometimes patterns are things that are not good candidates, even if they work in the photograph. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But like, I love the cracks. I feel like the crack in that lip makes your drawing, because it's just, it's like this really impressive, you know, rendering moment.
Oh, thank you. I was very much struggling with the fact that this has to be, because I'm seeing it in the photo, it has to be renderable somehow, that this kind of purity of it has to be translatable. So I appreciate what you just said, that sometimes you might have to simplify something in order to make it believable, rather than just going exactly one-to-one.
Well, and not even simplify. Sometimes it's about suggesting. So if you think of the French Impressionists, the reason why they're called the Impressionists is they paint the impression of something. Nothing is fixed and solid and tied down. It's all sort of dappling moments of paint. And so I actually just led my advanced class. Their first assignment was to work from a still capture from a movie or television. So for the majority of them, and the reason why that assignment, the ulterior motive is those are all going to be such low quality references. How do you fill in those gaps? And the best way to fill in the gaps usually is to suggest and say, so if you're looking at a tiny figure that's grainy, don't try to draw eyelashes and nameable things. You just show the shadow in the shape that you see it in the low resolution image. But that's something to keep in mind as well. But other times you want just a stronger reference. So like my chickadee, I actually had to repaint it because the first image I chose was too low reference, low quality. And so it was just so frustrating that I just changed it to a clearer reference. So keep that in mind too when you're working.
Can I say one little thing?
Yes, sure.
Sometimes when you're doing a piece of work, it becomes too precious. And what I remind my students about is you can do it again. You can do it 10 times. You can do it 1,000 times. Don't get caught up in this is the one that has to be perfect. Just let go. And usually the third one is better. Yeah.
Sure. I would also add to that the unexpected is so present in art making that I believe that art making is a balancing of chaos and order. And so I've had great success working with the unexpected and the unexpected things because they always pop up. And so rather than try to control your artwork from its inception to the end, being like, no, you will be this, I try to pay attention to what the artwork is actually doing, because oftentimes you'll get unexpected things like textures or just really unexpected things, and it becomes a conversation with the work itself as opposed to you like managing and demanding that this thing do what you want. It's a very different way of working. But thank you for that, Tina. Any other shares? Yeah, let's see. I saw a hand. Natia?
Is there any techniques that to draw the eyes you can feel the emotion, because usually it's very difficult.
Yes. So I would recommend that you do a drawing of an extreme close-up. That my students that are just starting out, I have them zoom in on their subjects, because the larger your subject is, the more room you have for detail. And so I'd recommend that you do it on, on an 8x10 piece of paper is enough for just one eyeball. And if it's that big, you'll be able to capture the detail. And if you're focusing on the values like you did today for the exercise, that's when the believability is going to come in. When I'm painting a figure at a certain point, my cameras, when I'm taking photos of the paintings, see it as a human face. And that's only, so you're aiming for that. You want the psychology of the artwork to have an impact. And so that's why you need to match the realism of it. That's not completely true. For sure, we can be affected by cartoon images and stylized faces, but I find realism is a very easy sell for psychology. And art and psychology are completely intermixed. My mother came from an advertising background, and that's actually the lens at which I approach my artwork. So any strategy that an advertisement would use to entice you or to up the impact of their advertisement can be deployed in an artwork. And so you can evoke nostalgia, you can use sexuality, you can use sort of like hide things from the viewer. These are all tricks that advertising use because psychology is so intermeshed with art. And so find a reference too that's evoking those emotions from you before you even draw or paint it. Make sure that, and so maybe you take the photo or you're careful about that image, because you're going to be taking the power from that. My aunt, who's the Chinese brush painting master, told me that the aim of Chinese brush painting is to capture the essence or soul of your subject. And so I like thinking about that. And when I talk to my students about working from photographs or life, I say that it feels like you're, to capture the soul of a photo of a mountain is different than capturing the soul of the mountain from life. And to me, that's a big difference. That's not totally related to your point, but.
Do you feel that there's any struggle there with photorealism becoming divorced from the soul of the subject, especially when you're trying to get those details and the accuracy and all of that that we were talking about?
Well, you know what? I'm such a storyteller that I used to not care about the aesthetics at all. I used to think that it was really just the narrative elements where the impact lay. But lately I've come to realize that it's how you paint the thing is as important as what it is in communicating the story and those details. And so balancing the aesthetics with the narrative is more my concern, I guess, because I've been just focusing a little bit more on the aesthetics since I've neglected it so much. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, everyone. This has been truly enjoyable. And I see that it's almost 2:30. So I really like to just jump in and thank Professor Chung for sharing your time with all of us, and thank all of you for sharing your time to join this program. Before we close, however, I'd like to invite Reverend Yuika Hasebe from Hompa Honganji Betsuing to read the Metta Sutta.
Thank you, Reverend Jiko. Let us put our hands together in Gassho. May all beings be happy. May there be joyous and live in safety. All living beings, whether weak or strong, in high or middle or low realm of existence, small or great, visible or invisible, near or far, born or to be born. May all beings be happy. Let none deceive another, nor despise any being in any state. Let none by anger or hatred wish harm to another. Even as a mother, at the risk of her life, watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind, should one cherish all living things, suffusing love over the entire world, above, below, and all around without limit. So let each cultivate an infinite goodwill toward the whole world. Namanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Hasebe. So to everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to invite you to attend future HABE events and to consider becoming a member of HABE. And so once again, to Professor Chung, thank you so much for a very memorable afternoon, a very healing afternoon, and I think for inspiring all of us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Everybody be safe.
Thank you.
Take care.